Okay, hello everyone at Achieve Oxfordshire and everywhere else that you're listening or watching. I'm Lizzie, an adult weight management practitioner at Achieve Oxfordshire, and I've been joined by an incredibly special guest that's here today. I'm really excited to meet with him, and I'm going to just introduce him now. So this is Matt Williams. He's currently the Digital Health Engagement Manager with the Oxford Academic Health Science Network, and you're working on a project rolling out a digital therapeutic which improves poor sleep and mental health across the south of England. So that in itself is incredible, but it doesn't just stop there. He was until recently involved in the early intervention in Psychosis Network and was also the Suicide Prevention Project Facilitator. All that's hard to say at Oxford Health NHS Foundation Trust. And you know, something that's really quite prevalent right now is that you've been a listening volunteer with Samaritans since 2009, and you're currently the director of Oxford Samaritans, and you're incredibly dedicated to male suicide prevention across the UK, but obviously focusing around Oxfordshire and surrounding areas. So thank you for joining us, Matt. Big round of applause there. I kind of went between third person and first person there, so I'm really sorry, but it's so great to have you. And I would love it if you could just kind of go into a little bit more depth about your passions and your work, and why you're here and what you're going to spread the word about today.
Great. Yeah, no, very happy to do that. You know, I guess my journey in this whole area came from my training and then listening as a Samaritans volunteer. I got very involved in Samaritans quite early on. You know, I've done a lot of training in my life, and the training that Samaritans gave me was really kind of excellent, and I was really inspired by that. And so, you know, not long after training, I became the branch's publicity officer, got involved in outreach work. And for me, the turning point really came in around 2014, and I attended a male psychology conference in London, just because, you know, I'm interested in mental health and psychology and all of those things. And, you know, I couldn't escape the fact that at the time, 78% of all suicide in the UK was male. I became a dad in 2013 to a little boy. And I think that kind of was a moment where it really made me reflect on what it means for me. You know, what sort of dad am I going to be? What sort of dad was my dad to me? And what kind of guy is my son going to grow into? What do I want for him? And how am I going to make sure that he becomes, you know, a good man and doing the right thing, and also being aware that male suicide, you know, has increased. It's always been high, but suddenly it was the biggest single killer of men under the age of 45 in the UK. And I felt really, as a Samaritan, this is something, you know, listening on the phone. Yeah, we do talk to men, but not perhaps if 78% of all suicide were male, 78% of our callers weren't. And I got very inspired by a woman called Jane Powell. And Jane had created an organisation called the Campaign Against Living Miserably, a dedicated male suicide prevention organisation. I say organisation because it's a charity, but as we'll probably touch on, men don't tend to see, you know, we don't see ourselves as being worthy of charity. We don't see ourselves as charity cases. And so, you know, the language, the tone of it, of that campaign really kind of turned me on. And I was working in the field of suicide prevention in the NHS at the time. And so I, you know, got involved in establishing the CALMzone, the third such CALMzone, across, you know, in the country after Merseyside, where CALM started, and Greater London, which is probably one of my kind of proudest achievements. So that's really where my kind of passion comes from. You know, I think, you know, I've not had a boring life, and being a Samaritan's been one of the best things I've ever done. And it just felt to me that, you know, I'm all for equality. And, you know, although it seems slightly odd to me to be talking about, but what about men, you know, in the 21st century, actually, if 78 or 80%, as it is in Oxfordshire, of suicide is male, then there is an issue around gender that needs to be addressed. So that's what kind of drives me.
And there's kind of, I really want to just scale it back a little bit, because obviously I think a lot more people are aware that men don't necessarily talk as much about how they're feeling, things that they're experiencing. We also know that they don't necessarily go to healthcare providers as much as, say, women do. But I kind of want to look back to, you're talking about your son and how he's going to grow up, and actually the language that we use around young people and where that starts. Because yes, we can help men who are, adult males, and be there as support and signpost. But actually, if the language around kind of boys and girls and stuff is very, I can't think of the right word, but if I know, I used to teach basically, and I know that I used to say certain things to boys that I wouldn't necessarily say to girls. And that's something that I've picked up on myself. And I know that it's still happening within the education system. And it's happening with, I see parents do it where they go, oh, come on, just man up. Oh, boys don't cry, and those kind of things. Or they don't ask for help. You've got to do it yourself type thing. But that's not the same message that we give to girls. So I'm just wondering how much information you can give us around that, and what we can do, and how much more awareness we can have when we're actually speaking to young males.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and it's something I've reflected on a great deal. Had my son been a girl, I'm sure I'd be interested in all sorts of the other aspects of young womanhood, and girls would kind of exercise me as well. But as somebody who, there was no blue or pink, in terms of my son. It was very, my wife and I decided we wanted to be quite, not, just be very neutral in the colours and things and the types of toys that he played with. We were very much aware of that dichotomy of, or rather not, going into that dichotomy of boys, girls, boys toys. That's not something boys do. And yet I found that he was gravitating towards things. Every stick he picked up was a gun. Which for sort of a pacifist, anti-war campaigner like me was, it's partly there. I also was very aware that, when my son falls over in the playground and I come and comfort him, I know instinctually, when I reflect on it, that I would respond differently if it was a girl falling over. So despite my best intentions, there are aspects which are so deeply ingrained. And I think you're right. My real issue is that we really see this identity happening around 7 or 8 years of age, where my son is now. And I guess there's two things that bother me. Yes, we can come on and talk about man up, get cracking, pull your socks up, don't be a wuss, and those things, which I think are unhelpful. What really bothers me is things like, don't cry like a girl, you throw like a girl, you're behaving like a girl. And that for me is really toxic, because it's not only, you basically are saying to boys, girls are something you don't want to be like. And I think it demeans women, and it also closes boys' minds to opportunities. And I think it's really, really sad. My contention is, if we allow boys to really be themselves, express themselves, even if boys want to express themselves in certain ways, and for all my son, he won't thank me for this when he's 18 or whatever, but for all him picking up a gun and being into trucks and stuff, I'm not interested in trucks whatsoever. I don't know where that came from, but he was obsessed with JCB diggers for a time when he was 4. And like I say, every stick was a sword or a gun. But he also wanted to have his nails painted. He wanted to, do you know what I mean? It's, he wanted to put on my wife's jewelry. That's perfectly sort of, natural for kids to play with that. But I can, you can just feel, and I remember speaking with another dad where he was bothered that his son was sort of skipping, dancing and singing. And he was really troubled by that. He didn't feel it was manly or appropriate for a boy of 5 or 6. And my contention really is that men would be a lot more happy and a lot more interesting I think as a gender, we'd be far more fascinating if we were allowed to really express ourselves in the ways that we wanted to, and not be constrained by this relentless diet of, it's beer and football and don't do this and don't muck about and, crack on, mate, man up. Actually, and I think this generation will be far more comfortable about expressing their thoughts and feelings than mine. I'll be 50 next year, and I think about my dad. Now, sadly, my dad died, a couple of years ago, but he was of a generation who didn't talk, who weren't allowed to kind of express themselves. And I think we are making progress, but we need to tackle that. I also think we can't beat ourselves up, because for all, my sort of liberal credentials, I still find myself. Now, I'd never say to my son, you throw like a girl. I mean, that would be appalling to me. But I do find myself kind of, if he falls over, dusting him off, and saying, come on, get up. And I kind of catch myself. But these things run deeply. And what's pernicious is that notion of you should be able to do it by yourself.
Yeah.
Because actually, no man is an island.
Yeah, it's so interesting actually that you made the point about, the like a girl, and actually not only how that affects that person and what you're saying to them, but actually how it affects their view of, like you say, women and girls and things like that. That's such a good point, and not something that I'd really thought about before. And it is changing, you're right, it is, but you still have that thing of, I teach dance on a Saturday, I absolutely love it, and we have minimal boys, and it's so great when we do have those boys come in at a young age. I find when they get about 6 or 7, they get pulled out, and the reason is, most recently, I had a great little boy. He was amazing. He loved it. You could tell he really enjoyed being there. Like he loved the class. We do loads. It's not dancing. He was doing we do a lot of kind of musical stuff, and it's so much around coordination. There's just so much to it, and I could bang on about it all day. But anyway, he left, and I spoke to his dad, and his dad said he's getting bullied at school. At 6 years old for dancing, like surely we've moved on from that a little bit, but apparently not. And I think you're right, being able to express yourself within like the arts is something that isn't, or in any way actually isn't something that's necessarily it's not encouraged for boys, is it? It's not like
no it's not
great. It's kind of like, no,
I mean, my son is one of 3 boys. It's part of his stagecoach class. The rest are all girls. It's singing, it's dancing, it's drama. Happily, I'm really pleased to say that he really loves it. And I hope that continues. I hope that he doesn't feel the need to kind of go, actually, I'm going to stop doing something I really enjoy because I'm worried about what other people will think. But of course, it's not easy, and like I say, as I approach 50, I am what I am. I'm a white, cisgendered, liberal, middle class, middle-aged man. But I want to encourage my son to do that in a way that I was encouraged to paint and draw and play music and do all of the things that actually makes life fun. And if my son were into football, then great. He enjoys gymnastics as well, and that gave him a lot of body confidence. And I think really what we need is for boys and girls to have confidence, body confidence in themselves. And that's not to say we're going, you can be anything you want to be, or you can achieve, reach for the stars, you can achieve your dreams, because actually that's not necessarily true. But what I'd like is for people to be satisfied. If we as human beings can be satisfied, not necessarily happy, because happiness is fleeting, it's transient, but if we can be satisfied and comfortable in our own skins, then we'll treat ourselves with dignity and we'll treat other people with dignity. And one of the things, when you say about what I want my son to be like, for me, it's going to be around things like consent, about what's a healthy relationship, how does he view women, what is his attitude to women and himself, and I think these are real hot areas. And for all my real concern is about male well-being, but it's also about the wider society. I worry about
Yeah.
the availability and access to hardcore pornography on both boys and girls, and the psychosexual issues that will no doubt come into play in therapy in years to come, and about all of those aspects, as well as equality, and also racial equality, and equality around sexuality and gender. So I think there's an awful lot of work to do, but like I say,
how do you think, where we're at the moment, and things are changing slowly, but how do you think that is affecting boys, in particular boys, as they grow up, and their attitudes towards getting help, whether that be in the mental health or even physical health?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult issue, because I think what we're seeing is that schools are taking it much more seriously. And just a few things I just want to unpack from what you were saying earlier on. There is a contention that men don't talk, and I just want to come back to that, because I think this is really the nub of what's going on at the moment. And I think we have made huge strides even since 2014. I think we've seen a growth in the number of male-focused charities around mental health, physical health. In 2014, it was pretty much the Campaign Against Living Miserably, and that was about it. But since then, there's a whole, a whole plethora of organisations setting up, and the landscape is changing. But my sense is, actually, I talk to men all the time about all sorts of things, whether it's mental health problems, physical health problems, sexual problems, emotional problems, just life's difficulties, and men are perfectly able and capable of speaking lucidly about their feelings. Part of the problem is that if you ask a man how he's feeling, do you know what I mean? I don't find that helpful. And for me as a Samaritan, how do you feel about that, or how are you feeling, can be a really excellent question, but it can also be a really crass and stupid, clumsy question. And it's like, get lost. So it's not about, so the issue really about men, and really this is where it goes hand in hand with encouraging help seeking, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but it's about, how do we get guys to say, actually change the dynamic, instead of saying I need help and seeing it as I need help from a position of weakness. And I mentioned charity, and the fact that men don't consider themselves worthy of charity is changing that dynamic to actually saying to young men, and men in general, and boys, encourage them to say, I need help, I'm taking responsibility for my own well-being, I'm taking responsibility, and I can't deal with this by myself, and I'm asking you to help me, to assist me, to make me better, and it's changing that from rather seeing it as being a weak act to actually being a strong act. And one of my favorite lines from the Campaign Against Living Miserably is, being silent isn't being strong, because it isn't. Being silent is, for me, is kind of a weakness. If you've got a problem, actually the courageous thing to do is to acknowledge it, address it, and speak about it. Now, what stops men from talking is the fear of being judged, and a sense it's not safe. So for men to say, I'm struggling, I don't think I can cope, and you say that to your partner, well, that could be a relationship ending. Whether it is or it isn't, it's in a guy's mind that this could end my relationship. You're not the man I thought you were, get out. If you say it at work, depending on your workplace, that could be career limiting. It could even be career ending if you work in, the military or the police or legal service or medical, where competency and mental competency is a sort of a paramount thing. That could be unsafe for you. And I always remember one of my friends, when we were in the sixth form, a long time ago, it was end of term. We went down the pub. We all sat around. Pints in hand. One of my mates had 2 pints. I thought, that's a bit bold. He downed one, he downed the next, he slammed his glass on the table, and he said, I'm gay.
Oh, bless him.
Exactly. And we were like, okay, that's cool, all right. And he was shocked. And the reason why he'd had 2 pints, as you can imagine, was for Dutch courage. He thought that when he said, "I'm gay," that we would turn on him and that would be a physical, if not a metaphorical fight, that he would be attacked for being gay. And so what I'm saying really is that he carried that through school, through the sixth form, and it was only when he came out of the sixth form that he felt able to express himself. And that was his perception of the situation. So for him, it was unsafe to say, "I'm gay," even though when he said it, actually, we were supportive of him. So one of the things that stops men from talking openly and freely is the fear, rightly or wrongly, whether it's perceived or in reality, that it will be unsafe. The other aspect, I think, which I think needs to be addressed, is that a man's sense of himself as a man, of his own masculinity, of his own manhood, his own potency, his own, sense of self, that is actually quite easily damaged. I think we don't want, as men, if I opened up to you now, part of me is thinking, well, will you, Lizzie, think of me as less of a man? If I tell you this, will you judge me? Will you impugn my masculinity? Will you see me as being lesser if I open up? And I hope that the answer to that question is no, you won't. And actually, we'll have a good back and forth and a good conversation. But for many, many men, that is not how they see it. I talked to one young lad once, and he said, opening up and talking to my mates, it sounds silly, he said, but for me, it's like asking a girl out. It's high risk.
Yeah.
If I say the wrong thing, I'm going to be rejected. And that rejection really bloody hurts. And I don't want to be rejected. So I'm really reticent about talking to my mates. Now, actually, my sense is that he will be like my mate who down the red line slams his pint glass on the table and says, "I'm gay," or whatever it is that's eating him. So I just wanted to address that first and foremost. Actually, what we need to do, like I say, men can talk, but what we need to do is allow men to make their statements in an environment that hears it, doesn't judge, and it's safe. And by safe, I mean it's not going to be, and it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, so here I am talking about safety. I think about women opening up to men and saying certain things. And when we talk about safety, we talk about actual physical, and sometimes mortal safety. But for men, it's about the sense of safety in terms of, is this a safe space for me to express myself? Look at me just mansplaining the whole thing.
No. There's, oh my goodness, my mind is just blown. There's so much that I want to ask you about this because it's so interesting. And, I'm thinking about actually how it sounds so simple to say it, like this is how men are feeling and this is, they can't talk about this because of X, Y, and Z. But I don't know whether those thoughts actually go through their mind or whether it's just a subconscious thing. Are they, if somebody's listening to this and going, "Oh, well, I think I'm fine," sorry, that was my man impression. That's terrible.
we've all done it. I mean, I did one earlier where I was going man up, so I think we can allow ourselves one or two, can't we?
Yeah. But I'm thinking, is somebody listening to this or watching this and thinking, well, I'm a man and I don't have those thoughts, I'm fine. And actually is part of the issue, not only that maybe they're not necessarily talking about it, but because of that stuff that's happened when we're younger, and it's, things that happen in childhood get very much ingrained into us. Are they then maybe not even recognizing when things are building up and when it's time to go let it out, and maybe they're thinking about saying something and letting it out and not recognizing that what is stopping them, what the barrier actually is. So that's my first thing, and then I've got something else to go through as well. So I'm just wondering, is that something that that everyone's different, but is it something that commonly is a conscious or a subconscious thought, and how can we approach that?
Yeah, I mean, and like all things, masculinity is not a monolith. We are, like I say, what I'd like is for there to be a wide range of flavors and textures and shapes and sizes of guys who are comfortable in their own skin, who are sort of loving and kind. But men are on a spectrum. I think the real issue here is that I can't speak for everybody, But I think you're right. I think you touched on some really important things. So, for example, I'll be very open. I had psychotherapy. I had psychotherapy for about 8 years. It's part of, my interest in psychodynamic therapy. And so I went through the process. If you'd asked me before then, did you have a happy childhood? I'd have said, absolutely, I did. 100%. And I did have a happy childhood. Do you know what I mean? But through the course of my psychoanalysis, I discovered that I made myself unhappy during my childhood in many ways. I discovered things about myself. It was an incredibly illuminating process. Now, I'm not saying everyone can go through that. That was expensive. Actually, it's the best money I've ever spent. And I wouldn't be talking to you as I am now without it, I don't think, so, to a great extent. So I became aware of sort of hidden sadnesses, hidden loneliness. I mean, I've always known I'm quite I'm not melancholic, but I'm aware of the sort of darkness within me, within humanity, within the human condition. I was just able after the therapy to really kind of make sense of it. Why am I angry about this? Why am I hurt about that? Why don't I feel that, I'm able to do X, Y, and Z? So I would say that without that intervention, I would have been, I wouldn't have recognized I had issues. And I think you're right. But I think there are a lot of guys who wear a mask. A lot of women wear masks as well. The mask of masculinity, as the band Idols sing on one of their songs. We put on a mask, we put on our armor, and we go out and we face the world. And behind that mask, there is a conscious and unconscious recognition that all is not well. And I'm just going to share something with you. One of the things I do, and until the pandemic happened, I was most proud of as a Samaritan in Oxford, is that we run something called Feet on the Street. Feet on the Street is basically proactive Samaritaning. We go out to Cornmarket Street in Oxford, pedestrianised area, and every other Friday, unless it's raining, because no one wants to stop and talk when it's raining. We approach people. Hey, how's it going? Hey, how's it going? And most people sound fine. Now, occasionally, some people go, "Oh, fine." You don't necessarily sound. You don't sound fine. You sure you're okay? And we stop and we talk. And the reason I bring this up isn't I'm not bragging about, I'm so good because I do this. For me, what I could, because I started to run it about 5 or 6 years ago, I was interested in who stops and talks. And 2/3, literally like 66% of people who stop and talk on the street are men.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now, why is that? And I'll explain a little bit as to why it is. But also, the fact is this, and this is the conversation which often happens, is that when we're talking with these guys and women as well, but particularly with the men, and we say, would you ever think about calling Samaritans? Would you ever think of picking up the phone and speaking to Samaritans? They go, no. Do you know about Samaritans? Yes. But you wouldn't phone? No. Why? And invariably the response comes because I'm not that desperate, or it's not for me. What about the kids? What about older people? What about women? And it's the same when my NHS work, asking about men and mental health. Why don't you go to your GP? Why haven't you gone to see access? You're worried about your mental health. Why haven't you been sick? And the guys tend to say, all I ever hear is, in the newspapers, on the news, is the NHS is full to bursting.
Yeah.
What about women? What about the kids? What about the older people? They need it far more than I do. So it's a sort of a weird sense that for them, Samaritans isn't an issue for them. Now, why am I bringing this all up? Well, what I would say is that from the statistics, I'm not going to divulge any betray any confidences, but we speak to about 300 plus guys and women on the street in Oxford every year, and that's just one night every fortnight. About 300 contacts, I would say, where we actually have a conversation of some emotional heft. 1/3 of the people we speak to, so literally 33% of people who stop and speak are in emotional distress at that time.
Yeah.
Now, these aren't people who want to call Samaritans. These are people who fall into conversation and start talking. So 33%, 1/3 of them are in emotional distress at the time. And around 15% out of the total of 300 are expressing thoughts of ending their own lives, whether or not they've made a plan or whether or not they're actually thinking about ending their lives or having suicide thoughts. And the reason I bring this up is because when we get into these conversations become very much like the ones we take in the branch where we're on the phone and we're talking about real issues of life, death, loss, abuse, bereavement, addiction, all the things that hurt people. We speak with them on the street. And invariably it's the men, I would say, who then unburden themselves in a way. They let loose, because after about, there'll be 5 or 10 minutes of we circling each other, as it were, and really what's happening is I'm sussing out, or they're sussing out, can I trust you?
Yeah.
I trust you. And when we hit a level of trust, I'm quite attuned to it, I might ask, sounds like things are really difficult for you right now. Do you ever think about ending your own life? And this is on the street, a busy street on a Friday night, and the answer will come back yes. And then we talk about that. And I think that, to answer your, this is a long way round of answering your question, but I think there are men and women who carry around a lot behind the mask. And there are people, it's difficult because there are guys who will ask, are you okay? Is everything fine? And actually, yes, everything is fine. There is no hidden sadness or deepness, or unless you probe really deeply, and that's not my business. But actually, there's a mixed bag. And like I say, before I was a Samaritan, if somebody come up to me in the street and said, hey, are you okay? I'd have gone, yeah, fine. And off I've gone. I wouldn't have stopped, now happily, I've had sadness in my life, everyone does. And the key thing is finding the right support, the right person to listen to at the right time.
Yeah. Can I just jump in as well? Because I know that with Samaritans, you can email them as well, can't you? With Samaritans.
You can, yes.
Yeah. Because I was going to say, sometimes I know that people might feel that picking up the phone is a little bit too much. But I've emailed Samaritans before and it's been amazing. And I'll tell you that something that stopped me originally was the thought of I'm not worth their time type thing, because like my problems are just kind of mine, and it's there's a lot worse things going on in the world. Actually, they've got a lot of other people they really need to help, so I'm just not gonna I'm not gonna ring them. And it took ages, and then a friend of mine said, oh Liz, you can just email them if you want to. And I don't know why, but that action of just emailing felt like okay, I've got it out, I've written it all down. Like, even if I don't get a response, which I did, like really good. Like great response. I think it was like, hi, I think it was always from Joe. Like it was always there's like a classic name, that they use. And it was really amazing, and it did then lead on to myself just going and getting counselling and stuff, because someone validated the fact, and this was the other thing through the process, someone actually just validated the fact that what I was experiencing wasn't easy, and actually I did need help, and I wasn't just moaning for no reason. It was very valid what I was experiencing. And I think that can be the first, just taking that first step when you are feeling things getting on top of you, of whether it's a friend or it is Samaritans or it's another charity or something. It's, if somebody, that first thing, it does take I can't even explain it. It does take a huge weight off of you. And even, and it can be difficult. It wasn't something that I felt comfortable speaking to family or friends about necessarily. So having that was just such an amazing, it must have been about 5 or 6 years ago now, but it was incredible. And it really did, just that validation of life is not easy. And we don't, once you leave school, you don't really have help. Everyone goes about their busy lives. No one really asks, how you doing? Like, and genuinely, it's always like, you go pop into, hey, you're right. Yeah, I'm all right. Even if you're not, you just go, yeah. But to have someone, the same thing with what you guys do, like the feet on the street, incredible work as well. Like just having someone go, how are you doing? Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Oh, no, but how are you actually doing? Like, and I think it was Ruby Wax who says, she goes, what's the weather like in your head today? Just so that you don't have to say, oh, feeling rubbish. You'll be like, oh, it's a bit cloudy, or it's great, I feel really good, that kind of thing. And there's a lot out there to help people. But the biggest thing, like I think you've really highlighted today, is those barriers that come up, and that fear. And I really want to touch on that fear of, maybe how you get seen at work, how you get seen by your partner, and especially something for men and women, for us as partners, wives, husbands, all that kind of thing. Like, what can we do to, so like for me, I can recognize when my partner is very stressed and when he's got a lot going on. And I know if I say, are you stressed? He'll, no, I'm not. But he I don't even know if he sees that I see it, but he forgets a lot of things. Like, he forgot to lock the front door the other day, and which he would never normally do, and he kind of trips over a lot. Like, it sounds really weird, but he just trips over his own feet.
That sounds like stress, doesn't it? You forget your car keys, you don't do that, you lift the kettle on,
Yeah, and he gets a little twitchy eye, and I know that he's stressed, and I'm like, how, I don't always feel that I'm the best person to speak to, being his partner and stuff, but you do wonder, like, what's the best way to approach this? How can I? And for me, my solution seems to be just doing stuff for him. Like, okay, I'll make sure he's like got dinner, or I'll make sure I do something nice for him and that kind of thing. But it does feel like, I just want you to offload, and I don't know how to get you to offload, because it's you're such a man's man, and you can't talk about things, and it's not something that he chats about with his dad necessarily. So this is very personable to him. I hope he never sees this. But yeah, it's just really, I am just intrigued, and I know that everyone is different, but is there anything we can do as partners to encourage offloading, or and sorry, because I keep asking you questions and then I talk over you. There was one thing that I know is really helpful in terms of, men generally like to feel like they are helping and they're fixing things. So if you could get them to be doing something whilst talking at the same time, generally that is a good way to get them to open up. But I just wondered if you had any other tips of being able to, first of all, signpost, but also just get them to talk about things.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's just back up a bit. I mean, I'm really, thank you so much for sharing what you said about emailing Samaritans. And actually, you're right. Some people don't like to pick up the phone, men and women, and the same for men and women, that they tend not to see the service as being for them. Oh, it's just my problems. Invariably, if I'm honest, the people who say to me on the phone, I'm probably wasting your time, they're probably more important people to, or more urgent things for you to, people to speak to. They tend to be the ones who actually have a hell of a lot going on in their lives. So thank you for being so honest about that and sharing that. And I'm delighted to hear that the response was a good one. And of course, emailing, writing it down. The act of writing things down I find very cathartic. I sometimes write an email and then I don't need to send it, because actually I've expressed what I needed to say in that bit. But absolutely, in terms of how we can better support men, it's a tough one, because men are very different. But you're right. First and foremost, let's go to the last thing you said, really, which was about guys doing something. I'm a big fan of shoulder-to-shoulder talking for men. All right. If I speak to a man, I'm sort of looking at them, face to face, with a nice face on, an impassive face. That actually, for a lot of men, that can be quite confrontational. It can be seen as aggressive. Actually, we get the best out of our teenagers and men, I would say, when we listen side by side, particularly when a guy's doing some work, fixing something, which is why I love the idea of the men's sheds groups, which started in Australia and now sort of, and came to Ireland and are sort of spreading across the country, where, older guys get together and they do model railway, they make, they do woodwork, joinery, computer stuff, but they're working together side by side and talking when they do it. So I would say absolutely the time to have these conversations is perhaps not face to face. I think maybe I don't speak for all men, but many men, when we need to talk is sort of uttered, and you kind of think, I like talking. Do you know what I mean? But no one ever wants to. To some extent, it's that is unhelpful. So I think having a conversation whilst doing something I think it then allows men to kind of, it eases some of the sort of the tense situation of that. Now, I think there's a lot to be said, think about teenagers as well, but also the act of driving, whether you're driving, your partner's driving, you shoulder to shoulder. That can be a good time. Not when you've had an argument about map reading or whatever. That's when the sparks fly for me. Left, not that left. Or doing the washing up. You wash up, I'll dry, and you're having that time together, or walking together, walking in the countryside, taking some time out of the day to day. Now that's difficult. If someone's stressed, they may be stressed because they need to do work, and they but sometimes just getting away from it, going for a walk in nature. That in and of itself is restorative and therapeutic, but actually the act of walking together away from it all means you can have those conversations. Now, how you get into those conversations will depend on what it is you wanted to talk about. And I would say, don't ask how are you feeling, but ask those questions about the weather in your head, or just say, how are things? How's work? You seem really busy at the minute. And then guys will and teenagers and women will talk. And now if we're listening, we hear when somebody sounds sad or angry. You sound hurt about that, you sound angry about it. Can you tell me more about that? And that's what I tend to do when I'm talking to guys on the street or on the phone. I don't ask how you're feeling. I remember I was mentoring a volunteer a long time ago, and there's a female caller. She was saying, "Oh, it's terrible. I had awful diarrhea and I was vomiting all night. Oh, it was horrendous. It was, And after a little pause, the volunteer I was listening to said, "How did that make you feel?" And she said, "How the hell do you think that makes me feel?" And she slammed the phone down. It was clear. No. The right response there would have been, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry to hear that. That sounds terrible. How are you now? That sounds really awful." And not, and I think you're right. Guys like the notion of fixing. And I think this is one of the issues that we have, that to some extent there's a conception that the head is a bit like a car bonnet. You flick it up, tinker a bit, close up, you're good to go for another 20,000 miles or whatever. And of course the human brain isn't like that. Human life isn't like that. And I would say that it's about taking somebody out of that situation, picking your moment, not asking how you're feeling, not and I think you touched on something really, really, really important, and that is about genuineness. Okay, people ask, I think it's the lie we tell each other the most in this country. How are you? I'm fine.
Yeah.
And actually, and a lot of people, if you're going to ask if you're going to ask how someone is, be prepared to flipping well listen. And people make that mistake with me now. They go, how are you? And I go, yeah, well, you know what? When you ask, actually, and you see your face slightly fall, and so but I would say that it's genuine interest and genuine care, and I think there is a real issue because both males and females are heavily, heavily, heavily invested in the notion of the strong silent type.
Do you know, kind of, I really want to. Every time I go to the gym, they go to me, "Hey, you're right." And one day I just was like, "No, I'm not."
Actually.
And I think it's something, you're right, we do it too often. We go, "You're right. Hey, you okay?" And like you say, if somebody isn't and the thing is, it just it just falls so dead. So then it's like when somebody is genuine, we're like, "Oh, yeah, I'm all right." Yeah, but and the other person has to dig a bit more. Yeah, but how are you actually? How's work going? How's this going? And I think going back to what you were saying about walking and talking or doing something when you're chatting to someone, and making sure that you are being there as a listener and not as a fixer, not as "Oh, why don't you try this?" We always want to give the answers. It's something my mum, bless her, love her so much, but if I ever had a problem when I was younger, just have a cup of tea. A cup of tea will make it feel better. Let's have a cup of tea. That'll fix it. It's like, no, and it's almost like we've always got to find the answer. We've always got to fix things because, God forbid, something should be unfixable or we can't find a solution right now. Like, I'm a very solutions-based person, and I, think it's great to do that. But sometimes, you just have to let it rain and feel and sit in it, sit in that uncomfortableness. And is that a word, uncomfortableness? I don't know, but sit in that.
It spells out what you mean. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's important that you don't have to fix things right away. It's not like, and I always liken it to, like the Rocky montage. Like, he's feeling a bit rubbish, then he trains loads and he goes and wins, amazing. And we assume that in life that our life is like a film, and we go, oh, I've got this problem. Oh, I better just write a list and fix it all, and then I'll be fine. And then we're like, whoa, hold on a second. My montage didn't work. What's going on? Like, you can't, like you say, happiness is very fleeting. Finding that contentment and being satisfied and being able to have some tools in place that really help you in sort of hard times, that's gonna fare you a lot better than just brushing over things and being like, I'm fine.
Yeah. I mean, just to for me, I think it's not knowing, being uncomfortable with not knowing, I think is part of being human. And again, that's something, a benefit of psychotherapy, that actually life is unpredictable. All that is certain is we're born, and that death comes at the end. And I think everything else that happens in between, we have literally very little control over. And actually getting used to that idea is a hard one to take in. I would go even further than you, and I would say let's relieve ourselves of the moral, self-imposed moral obligation to fix another human's problem. Because actually, most of the time, I think about my own relationship. My wife comes downstairs. Oh, this has happened. That has happened. This has happened. That's happened. And I'm kind of going, well, have you thought about making, writing a briefing note, or have you thought about? And she goes, I don't bloody care. Yeah. Just listen.
I've done that. Yeah.
But it's easy to do. And even me with my years of listening as a Samaritan, I tend to, sometimes I think, oh, actually, I could help here. And I'm trying to be helpful, but it's not helpful. And actually, what I'm learning gradually is that actually, sometimes people just need to let it out. And all we need to do is to hear that, empathize. That sounds difficult. That sounds really tough. Yeah, I'm sorry you're feeling that way. Do you know what I mean? And not even say, oh, yeah, I know what you mean, because I went through the same thing, and you start making it about yourself. I think
that's the worst. Nobody wants that friend. No one wants that friend. What is it? My cat's blacker than your cat? Or my favourite is, if you've been to Tenerife, they've been to 11 Reef. Like, it's always trying to top it, isn't it? And do you know what? People have the best intentions. Like,
of course they do.
Yeah, I've been through that as well. But
they think that actually by saying, because you're going through this and I went through it, actually we're the same and I understand. It's a sort of there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. And the trouble is that advice is always the enemy of empathy. As soon as you start coming in and saying, well, have you thought about this? Or why don't you try and do that? Wouldn't it be easier if you stop listening? And sometimes people just need to express the distress they've got. And quite often, and particularly on the phone at Samaritans, there isn't an answer. Some of the people that we speak to are literally dying. There is no light at the end of the tunnel, through illness, through whatever. Their problems they're facing are intractable. They've got nowhere else to turn. And we listen to them and we spend that time with them. And I think it would be insulting. It would be sort of maniacal to kind of say, you know what, I've been talking to you for maybe, half an hour or whatever, and I'm going to tell you how you should fix your life. I mean, I would be appalled if somebody, pulled that one. I think we just need to have humility and reality as human beings. Accept life is bloody tough. Life isn't straightforward. It isn't easy. And if you've had an easy life, then wonderful. I want what you've had, but there isn't the perfect life. And sometimes we will hit stuff that is hard to deal with. And what I would like to encourage really is early conversations about this. And I'm just going to come back to something you mentioned, because there was a report that came out a couple of weeks ago, which was, I think, is really, really illustrative or really important. Now, traditionally in sort of suicide prevention circles, there's a broad sort of discussion that goes along the lines of, men are more likely to be in touch with the criminal justice system than they are with the mental health system before they end their own lives. Now, I think there's some element of truth in there in terms of guys often, have brushes with the criminal justice system, either as perpetrators or victims or both of crime. But what this report came out a couple of weeks ago suggests is that about over 90% of men in the year before they end their own life actually had reached out to frontline or help services. And more shockingly for me is that 38% had reached out to frontline services for help within the week before they took their own lives.
Wow.
Now, what that tells me, or one thing that it suggests to me, is that men are hearing the message. It's good to talk. I think everyone knows it's good to talk. But the real worry for me, and this is a really complex problem for society, the health service, the social service, the community to resolve, is actually, first and foremost, I'd say to men and women, anyone, open up sooner rather than later. I'd much rather somebody phone Samaritans when they've had a bad day or an argument with their partner, or something's got, and they're not even thinking about ending their own lives. They're just having a crappy time and they want to talk to somebody. I welcome that. But what it worries me is that what happens is that men do the right thing, that society expects, and they go to their GP or they go to their, a charity or a health service, a mental health service, an A&E or whatever it is, and they say, I need help and I need it now. And what they're told, and I'm going to sort of broad brush this, but is, yes, we can offer you, I don't know, CBT or therapy or group therapy, or we can refer you to a service, but there's a waiting list and it'll be about 6 months.
Yeah.
And sometimes these men do not have 6, and this is middle-aged men in midlife, this report was about, they might not have 6 days, let alone 6 months to wait. So I think there's a real complex issue here. And I think the message has to change, it has to be more nuanced. It's not just, come on guys, open up and talk because it's helpful and healthy. It's, guys, open up and talk because it's helpful and healthy, but do it sooner rather than later. And there's a sociological term called the big build, which means that what tends to happen is that, guy loses guy starts gambling, loses some money. I'm just riffing here, but guy gambles, loses money. It's stressful. He starts drinking. He's drinking and he's gambling. He's sort of, he impinges on his work. He loses his job. It causes friction at home. His partner walks out. Then he picks up the phone to speak to Samaritans.
Yeah.
Or visits his GP and says, I need help. At that point, you're not just you're dealing with debt, addiction, alcoholism, homelessness, worklessness. It's the big build. And it's at that point the men start thinking about ending their own life, potentially. And what I'm saying is, let's talk when it's the gambling debt, or when you're hitting the bottle a bit more than you feel is healthy.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about it. And we can't fix those things, but we will listen. And it's about reaching out sooner, but also that has to be coupled with services that are male friendly, that can spring into action when a guy actually puts his hand up and says, you know what, I am thinking about ending my own life, and it's a matter of time. And that's not necessarily sectioning or, this is about having some care that guy will, not just chucking antidepressants at it, but actually getting help around that. And that's, this is bigger than this conversation, but I think it's a really important part of it.
Yeah, it's a massive part of it. Yeah, and right through to the education sector, through to the healthcare sector, how we speak to men and boys and things, it creates a ripple, doesn't it? And we have to have that accessibility for everyone, but for men to be able to feel comfortable bringing these things to the table. And and yeah, like you say, it's a much bigger conversation, and we could, go on
We could
forever
talk
about it.
literally. I could literally talk for hours about it, but
Yeah, there is so much to go into, and I feel like there's a lot that we haven't even covered yet.
There is. I mean, one thing which I just wanted to chuck in there as well, Lizzie, sorry, is I don't know if you saw the Roman Kemp documentary. It was actually a very good one. I mean, I tend to watch these ones, and I would say it was a good one because actually it's very, very honest. I thought he was very relatable. But really what I want to pull out of it is that there was the ask twice rule, which he sort of came up with when he was talking to young men who had been impacted by a suicide. And he had felt suicidal himself, and one of his closest friends ended their own life by suicide. But what he said by asking twice is, "Are you okay? No, really, are you okay?" And it's kind of what I was talking about with Feet on the Street. We kind of do that in that arena. But if you make that part of your everyday, and again, it comes down to genuineness, not, are you okay? No, really, are you okay? Right, let's talk about the football or whatever. Actually mean it, then I think we're starting to allow people that space and freedom, that invitation to talk. And if guys don't want to talk, fine. No one's here to extract a confession, but if they want to talk, then I would say that ask twice, "Are you okay? No, really, are you okay?" I think is really sound advice.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, it's a really hard one, but very male dominated jobs and things, employers really need to be aware of it, and they need to, they're going to get more out of their employees if they're looking after them, looking after their mental health as well. And something as simple as that, line managers or colleagues or whoever, just that thing of saying, "Are you all right? Like, no, honestly, we've got time. Tell me, are you actually okay? How are you finding things?" It's so important, and it's really sad that how our mind is incredibly powerful, and if we don't look after it, it can spiral very, very quickly. And I just want to touch on really, really quick, I know we've run out of time, but I just really want to ask you about how people can access Samaritans. I know we touched on a couple of things, and what they can do basically to access that service and other services if you've got any others.
Absolutely. I mean, Samaritans is not the only game in town. What I would say about Samaritans, and this is particularly relevant to men and help seeking, if you're designing a service for men, and I've read a lot about it, and I've talked a lot about it, thought a lot about it. If you're creating a service for men, it has to be available immediately, i.e. 24/7. It needs to be anonymous, so the guys don't have to reveal who they are. It has to be kind of pretty much confidential, that whatever's said there doesn't really get relayed to other agencies, and it has to be non-judgmental. And by that I mean, when somebody says, "I feel X," or somebody slams their pint down on the table and says, "I'm gay," the response is, "I hear that. What's that mean for you? That sounds, it sounds like you're bothered about that. Can you tell me more about it?" No judgment, just, whatever you've done, whatever life's done to you, they should be listened to. Now, what I've just described there is what Samaritans provide. So I think it's still about, how do we get guys to pick up the phone or email and express how they're feeling early on. So to get hold of Samaritans, I'll tell you very quickly, it's 116 123, which is a free to call number. That's on the telephone. The phone will be picked up and someone will say, "Hello, Samaritans," or "Samaritans, can I help you?" And it's a human being. It's not a receptionist. It's a trained volunteer like myself and any number of the 170 volunteers we have listening with Oxford Samaritans all across the country. And you can talk about whatever you want to for as long as you want to. I mean, within reason, and we're there to talk about how you're feeling, how how life is, not to chat about the weather or the football or politics or religion or whatever it is, whatever hobby or someone might have, but we're there to listen. And so there we are around the clock, 24/7. So if you pick up the phone now, it's what just gone kind of 11 o'clock at our time. But it doesn't matter. You might be watching this podcast at 11 o'clock tonight, or 3 in the morning, or 4 in the morning. Pick up the phone and you'd speak to a human being. In terms of men, and you mentioned your partner, and if we were having a conversation about your partner, or say you were a friend and you're worried about a guy in your life, maybe a friend, a colleague, whatever, the other organisation I would be suggesting you pop them towards is the Campaign Against Living Miserably. So if you put CALM or Campaign Against Living Miserably in your search engine, you'll come up with I think it's CALMzone.net is the website, and they run a helpline open 5 in the evening till midnight, 7 days a week. They also do a web chat service 5 till midnight. It's not like Samaritans. They don't, we set one up across the Thames Valley, as I said, and they're professional people who answer the phone. And although they're professional, they're not, they come from nursing, caring, social, psychological, backgrounds, and they're listening. And again, it's that sort of anonymous service. Now, the reason why I say about CALM is that CALM is a service for men. Okay, it's not for everyone; it's for men, and that automatically kind of covers off that notion of, well, it's not for me, it's for, what about kids, what about women, what about older people? Actually, this is for men. So they're fantastic. I can't say enough good things about CALM. And if you ever see their posters or their postcards or any of their campaigns, it's irreverent, it speaks to men. Like I say, I went to that psychological men's psychology conference back in London back in 2014, 2015, whenever it was, and Jane Powell put this postcard up, and I'm going to drop a minor swear word now, but it simply said on a piece of toilet paper, scrawled on it, "Feeling shit, ? Call CALM on the number." And I must admit, I saw that and I felt elated when I saw that, because at last somebody is speaking to men, speaking to me as an adult, in terms that I understand. We all know, we've all felt shit before. We all know what that means. We all know what that feels like, whether men, women, young, old, gay, straight, black, white, doesn't matter. You know what that means. And at last, somebody's actually saying, if you feel like this, there's someone you can talk to. Not, oh, you're a bit down. Oh, you're a bit blue. Oh, you're a bit sad at the minute, dearie. It wasn't tea and sympathy. It was in your face. It was humorous, but it was serious. And that's what you want. The other organisation I'm going to mention is Papyrus. Papyrus are set up to reduce young suicide. They talk to people and young people are 30 and under. I'm way past that, but if you're 30 and under, Papyrus is for you. Also, in terms of me, if you're caring for somebody who's under the age of 30, and you're so right, Lizzie, you talked about when you leave school, there's not a lot of help. It's a weird time. I remember even at 22, I was a man, but I wasn't a mature man. I was just it's a weird place to be. And I must admit that was difficult. And actually, adolescence is tough, but actually early 20s are tough, and particularly at the moment with the pandemic and all of that stuff, and a lot of worries about all sorts of things about the future. So if you're someone caring for somebody at the age of 30, and that's not, I'm not saying that at your 30th birthday suddenly all your dreams come true and you kind of go, I'm fixed now. But you know what I mean. So Papyrus are another one. They're based in sort of the northwest of England, but they have a helpline, have an email service, I think. And they aren't 24/7, but they're open a lot, so they're also worth doing. And
I'll link to all of those
spaces, I'd say, which are worth going to and speaking to. And I would recommend all of them. Although I'm a Samaritan, I'm director of Oxford branch, and I'm hugely proud and honoured to be so. For me, it's about what works for you. You didn't want to pick up the phone; it didn't work for you. That was something you didn't want to do, but you found your way through emailing. And I feel it's the same as Samaritans. Samaritans were very kind of free-ranging. We don't give advice. But sometimes Papyrus are they don't necessarily give advice, but they certainly are a bit more sort of solution focused perhaps than Samaritans, where all we do is listen, and that's that's
it's so powerful, that, isn't it? It's so powerful just having someone listen, and I can't emphasize enough actually how much of a difference those emails made. And it was only a couple of emails, and it first of all, just writing it all down was great, but then the response that I got was so good. And I just, because you do wonder, like, oh, well, how are you going to give me any kind of, how, you can't get a lot out of an email, really. You know, when people send a text and stuff, it's not the same kind of communication, is it? But actually, like, those guys are so well trained. And it really came, I don't know if I was just lucky. I don't think that I was. I think I just had a really good, you know, it was just a really good experience. And I think that everyone would have the same experience that I had.
I mean, we take I think it's 10,000 calls a day. We take across the country as Samaritans, and you know, the vast majority, I would say, you know, some of them will be excellent, some will be good, and occasionally, you know, you might get a daft response, and that's just because there are 17,000 volunteers across the country, you know, helping Samaritans to do what they do. We can't all be, you know, and sometimes, you know, sometimes people ask me, you know, aren't you ever worried about saying the wrong thing? And I say no. And it's not me being, it sounds horribly smug and sort of arrogant, me saying that.
Oh,
what I mean by it is, I don't worry about saying the wrong thing, because I know I will say the wrong thing at some point. At some point, I will say something that I've misheard something. I'll, you know, and there's not always a right thing. There's plenty of wrong things, but there's not always a right thing to say. And the key thing is to have the humility to go, you know what, I made a mistake. I misunderstood. I'm sorry. Let's start again, or let's talk about this. You know. And that's the key thing. But I would say I'm really proud of the service that we do, and we get it right more often than we get it wrong.
Yeah, I honestly, I think it's incredible, and the work you do, and just like the passion that you have is so important. And like, obviously, we need more people like you, and I'm sure that there are more people as well. And I just feel really lucky that we've been able to have this conversation, and that I'm really hoping that people will listen and see it and recognise that there are people that care. You know, the world isn't just an awful place. Like, there's people out there, there's services there for you. Like, we can help, we're here to help, and that's, you know, find the support that you need. So I'll link all of those that you mentioned in the show notes, and make sure that people can access them. And yeah, I think that's everything. Obviously, I could go on for ages about this, because I think it's so important.
I've enjoyed speaking with you, so thank you so much, Lizzie. And yeah, I'm really glad you're going to put those details there. And yeah, absolutely, to everybody who is accessing this, you know, do reach out. You know, suicide or being sad isn't something that happens to other people. It can affect all of us.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt.